Good evening, everybody.
Not
Good
again.
evening again.
Good to see everyone. I want to welcome everyone to episode 574, if you can believe it, of Line Upon Line, The Value and Struggle for True Christian Leadership, Part 3, Wolves. So we have Michael and Mike tonight, and Dr. Ricks as always. If you would start us out, that would be wonderful.
Okay, just a few kind of personal ones, this groaners. Friend tells this lady, I suppose you're wearing that locket of yours as a momentum. What do you keep in there? The lady says, well, my husband's hair. She says, but why do you do that? Your husband's still alive. But she says, but his hair isn't. See, you can argue that I look better without hair, right?
Yeah, yeah, I thought.
I mean, it's hard to deny. Look at that golden dome. Never mind. Okay, another personal joke. This lady's at a party. She says, you're so much of a MAGA person. If I were your wife, I would put arsenic in your coffee. And he said, anyway, and he said, well, if you were my wife, I would drink it. You know it's a bad day when you wake up in the hospital and you're all trussed up with Band-Aids and things are all wrapped up and cased in, and your insurance salesman says, look, you're covered for falling off the roof, but not hitting the ground. All damages for hitting the ground we don't cover.
The sudden stop at the end that gets you.
It's like parachuting. It's a lot of fun until you, never mind. Landings where you break ankles, well, you might. One of my smart decisions, this is probably terrible to say, that the guy said, Lieutenant Ricks, don't you want to join the 82nd Airborne, the best division of the U.S. Army? And we're going to Vietnam. And I had the good sense to decline.
Yay!
I know that doesn't sound very patriotic, does it?
Yes, it does.
Oh, well. Mr. Doofus was so slow that his boss doesn't allow him to take coffee breaks because if he does, he'd have to give him retraining.
I've had employees like that.
I tell you, these are really personal. And for all you brave guys who are in the 82nd Airborne or that other one, 101st, I respect your great efforts.
Hey.
Okay, we're talking about the challenge of spiritual wolves. Really, the goal is, if you were Paul telling Timothy, you'd say, develop leaders and people that can wolf-proof your churches. And when I say leaders, I'm also referring to leaders within the congregation. If you want to call them group leaders, opinion leaders, there are different names you can give them. You want to equip them so that they can be strong enough to resist what's likely to come.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I have 7 precepts that I kind of put together. 7's a great number. They're overlapping and interconnected, but I believe they will be helpful, these 7. The first one is, you want all the mature brethren to know that the foundational doctrines are sacred. Leave them alone. Don't mess with the foundational doctrines. Ken, could you read Galatians 1:6, please?
Sure. I marvel that you're turning away so soon to a different gospel. I want to pervert the gospel of Christ. But even if we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel to you than that we have preached to you, let him be accursed. As we have said before, so now I say again, if anyone preaches any other gospel to you other than what you have received, let him be accursed.
Maybe the King James might say anathema, same meaning. And he said it twice. We can just speculate. There may have been other types of wolves getting into that church too, but let's say the Judaizing party wanted to move them away from the things that Paul had taught to a more, let's say, overregulated, Pharisaical type Jewish congregation. That still was a significant change. And Paul said, don't do it.
It would be a very big deal. I mean, for those who had not been exposed to Christ's ministry personally, or had that, that what they learned from Paul is the only foundation that they had for that aspect of it, where, the Pharisaical bent was a major problem that Christ dealt with over and over again. And yet, if you're back in the synagogues, keeping the Sabbath, and some of those people are coming along too, you can see how it'd be very easy for them to return to exactly the way, to exactly kind of things that Christ criticized if they didn't hold on to, or if they had never heard those criticisms in the first place.
See, those people could have been going to the synagogue for 10 and 15 years before Paul showed up. So they were friends socially, and religiously with these Judaizers, and it's like they could have been sincere talking to those people. You need to come back because where you're going is wrong. And, we're your friends. We've known you. And there's so much social pressure. And I think a lot more than we realize.
And when you read the first 2 chapters of Galatians, you see the power of the social pressure. Even got to Peter, of all people. Mm-hmm. But also, Paul says in there that many of these people came in secretly. They knew, in other words, it wasn't just that they were confused. They knew what they were doing, and they intentionally did it. There's like a wolf who comes into a pack, and he says, I'm going to split up this pack. Well, let me give you my idea of what most predators will do. But I think the pattern would fit. Like a wolf pack will shadow a herd of whatever, elks or whatever they are. And then sometimes they just go straight at a key point and try to break it in half or break it up. At least the weak and the stragglers and the young and the slow and the stupid and the old will get separated out, and they can eat them. I mean, I'm over, but that's pretty much it, right?
Right.
There's some really interesting footage. I remember maybe it was that Planet Earth that the BBC did some years ago now, and they got all this aerial footage of, how some of these wild dogs and stuff hunt. And, it's complex. It's like members of the pack will be, spread out in one area, and one will circle around and spook them towards them. I believe lions do the same thing. They scare the herd or the flock or whatever it may be and run them straight towards danger. That's something that's very possible. You start whipping up fear and worry, which you could see that in a Judaizing sense. You could see how you could whip up a lot of fear. Well, you're not following the traditions, and these are established, and
right.
Even Christ said they sit in the seat of Moses, and so you got to listen. And really, that was on its way out. It was a different kind of error.
And wolves are clever, and from our point of view, whatever are the foundational doctrines of the church that we learned, anybody who comes in and subtly challenges that's a no-no. In other words, I really believe you can augment the truth. You can get deeper and deeper levels of truth, but you don't want to undermine the foundation. Anybody, for instance, this happened in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century, so I know it's a real fact. One of the foundational doctrines was that Christ was fully human and fully divine. In the 2nd and 3rd century, they attacked that. Different groups attacked various ones of it. Well, if you undermine who Christ was, you're undermining the foundation. All kinds of clever things came in those centuries afterwards that led to what we would call an apostate church in the world. They undermine the foundations of, and then when they later said, well, you're you should stop keeping the Jewish holy days. Well, that's foundational too, if you understand it correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so anybody who undermines the foundation, we should teach people beware.
Sure.
And then maybe, can you think of any other foundational doctrines, like we're not going to be in God's family, or something like, or there's no resurrection? Paul fought that one too.
I thought of the Trinity, which came in much later, many years later, right? But the idea that, the things, a lot of the statements that the Bible makes, well, that's not the whole truth anymore. Suddenly, the Father is not greater, and suddenly, the Spirit is not sent by them. It's its own thing. It really undermines, your understanding in the simple terms that the Bible lays out about Father and Son. An understandable, relatable relationship. That's a big one in my opinion. I mean, that's gone very astray, and it's very much a test of faith amongst Christian denominations today. If you don't believe in that, well, buddy, you're out of here.
Yeah.
We've had trouble with that in some of our churches, and there are some clever arguments. Admittedly, understanding the Holy Spirit's a big deal. But here's what I think happens. When you believe in the Trinity, you think of God's family as a closed triangle. But that's not really it. There are a number of scriptures that show we will be part of God's family, if we persevere and hang in there and overcome and all that. And God's family is not a closed triangle. I mean, obviously, God is going to be God, Father, and Son. We're going to be down levels. I'm not admitting all that. But still, it's not a closed triangle.
Right.
And that's a foundational doctrine. And as I say, one of our churches, I know, a guy came on, he took a few people with him. He made a big to-do about the Trinity. And, well, it's interesting. In the King James, that's one of the worst parts of the King James translation, is that 1 John 5:8, which in most Bibles, there's a middle thing, with detail, and they'll tell you that is not in any of the original manuscripts.
Yeah.
Right.
One of the few big mistakes that the King James is still a very, very good translation, but that's one of the few mistakes that popped in there. They got it out of the Vatican, whatever it is. I can't remember the details, translation, but it was probably a political concession to the way they thought in those days.
But it shows you how much biblical proof there is for that doctrine if they felt like they had to add verses to justify it. Add the verse which has been most referred to in its support in the meantime. I've read some articles that, well, what scriptures do they advance for it? And it's real weak. It's the Father and the Son, or it's the Son and the Spirit. It's the, it's the Father and the Spirit. There's just... It's not the way that it's often presented, and that is the foundation. If you read, of statements of beliefs, various Protestant churches, that's like number one, top of the list. The most foundational.
And one thing against it, when you go through the letters in the New Testament, they're almost all they're addressed differently, but usually they will say from Jesus Christ and the Father, or the Father and Jesus Christ, over and over and over. But they don't mention the Holy Spirit, and as you address the letter, who it's from and why you're doing it. And if the Holy Spirit were an equal, that'd be quite an insult. Be left out of one or two, but you go through the whole list, and it's almost always in the name of the Father and Son. Father, I'm not diminishing the greatness of the Holy Spirit as God's powerful tool. So I'll be sure I say that. But like you say, any doctrine that messes with Christ, what he is, what his goals are, I call the foundational doctrines. He was resurrected. And actually, Sunday, sunrise, resurrection of Christ is also a false doctrine. Christ was not risen as the sun rose Sunday morning. If you look at all the Gospels carefully, he was already gone before the sun rose. I know that people don't know that because it's, anyway, I'm going to it now. But those are the kind of things that are foundational that we should stick with?
I did a sermon once on the Trinity and tried to find all the verses they used to support their belief. And I kept running into stuff and commentaries and stuff like, well, clover's got 3 leaves, so that supports the Trinity. About that level of support. I mean, it's just not there, as we all know. You know, it's just not.
But that's in, I remember reading Haley's Bible Handbook, real good historical information. Man, I'm learning a lot from this. You hit something on the Trinity and the dude waxes poetic for, pages or page at least, of just earnestness and all this. And it's like, for all the good that's going into this other work, this is a big thing to just, you got to get all emotional about it to justify it. It's not, there was no meat there to,
He does the same thing kind of with Sunday But there's a lot of good information in Haley.
But thus the importance of having a good foundation, because you would easily be led astray by somebody who otherwise has good information. And you run into that, all the time. If you want to read, religious literature, historical stuff, archaeological stuff, you're going to come across ideas that are not accurate, but if you're not well founded, you don't even know, you're just taking somebody's word for it.
What's the other one we use? A big one.
Bollinger?
Bollinger's. Yeah, he's got malfunctions in there.
I was reading Bollinger's appendix one day on the Sabbath, and he spent like 2/3 of it saying, we ought to keep the 7th-day Sabbath. And then his last paragraph is, we got to keep it on Sunday.
Yeah.
It's like 180 degree. I mean, after all this writing, 180 degree.
Yeah, the Sabbath is big. And that's why I put that table in the end of this paper that you all, at least you'll have it, where I go through all the holy days and show you how they fit the plan of God. And if our people know that, I think that foundation will be hard to shake. But I know we're not talking about that right now, but I just thought I'd throw it in there since you mentioned about the Sabbath day. But the key doctrines we should hold on to, they are important. The second precept is prepare for the doctrinal storm of the great falling away. Here's what we think will happen. At some point, God will remove some block on the spirit world, whatever it is. Paul mentioned it. They knew what it was, but we can guess, something like that. And Satan will be allowed to unleash an overwhelming bunch of demons to push theological deception. The first of the 4 horsemen of the final apocalypse is the white horse of religious deception, or you're conquered by religious deception. That is coming. The problem is we don't know when it's coming.
True. Getting closer.
I had a very strange conversation with someone yesterday, a younger man, that is long and elaborate, but had some ideas and felt like he was being led spiritually to ideas about prophetic things and a responsibility to evangelize right before the end, and a lot of it. And in some of the experiences and things that are being recounted, it worried me deeply that this is not God's Spirit moving, not in the recounting of it, and certainly not in the idea of illuminating the truth, because there was not a good understanding of a lot of Scripture. And we ended up having a good and a long conversation, and it ended just fine. But it was frightening to me in that sense that you have somebody that feels very sincere and fears they have to do something, and yet has no foundation. And that was my conclusion: is you need to pray, you need to fast, and you need to get your nose in this book and not go way out on a lot of limbs about a lot of other things in the world or the spirit world or whatever. Like, if you don't have this in place, you don't even know when you're getting bad information from anybody else. And I had not yet read these notes at the time that we had this conversation, but 100% it's like, and people feel like that. You get all feeling religious and you got to do something, and if you're not grounded, what are you doing? You're not helping yourself, and you're certainly not helping anybody else.
Getting all excited, but you don't know what to get excited about and what to do. Probably, I think also part of the trick is the timing. Probably before that 3.5 year period where the beast will be allowed to rule the Holy Roman Empire and influence the whole world, probably a year or 2 or 3 before that, God will allow the demonic world to unleash deception prior to the Christ coming back. But we don't know when that's going to happen. It could be only 3 or 4 years from now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it could be 10 or 12 years.
Yeah, there's a trend in young men turning to religion. I've read that certain churches are growing. One in particular, the fastest I've read in the United States, is the Eastern Orthodox Church, and that's a interesting wrinkle. If you have people, especially men, who are supposed to be the leaders of their households and the head and have a responsibility towards that and towards God and towards their families, of course. The fact that it's going to be pushed in that direction, everybody getting religious, you might think, yay, the general morality that goes along with it is great, but it's going to go somewhere really weird that we don't want to go.
Yeah, these mass baptisms, you don't know where that's coming from. Emotion somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean,
Big
it's a
rally
good thing
and
that
baptize 6,000 people. Like, well, what are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
There's no clear direction or understanding there. But it's better than being jihadist, I guess.
That's a pretty low bar.
Is it better to be a secularist or to get into religion, even if it's religion that's nominal Christian and not true Christian? Which is worse, to be a secularist or a nominal Christian? I think being a secularist is worse, but I could be wrong.
I agree. Because, we know a lot of really good people from an earthly definition, and they go to church. That's who I want living around me. They may don't have the truth, but at least they've got some Judeo-Christian ethics.
They're doing the best.
That I think the secular and the some of these alternative lifestyles just simply don't have.
Yeah, they're doing the best they can with what they've been allowed to understand.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
I don't know if I
Someday in the
should say
second
this.
resurrection, we'll be calling them brothers.
Mm-hmm. That's probably true on a lot of them.
Yep.
And they'll make us look bad.
That's true. Some of them live good lives, and you have to admire that.
You know what? One of the years ago, Jim, I forget his last name. He's been dead for a while now, but he said, there are better people sitting in the pews in Sunday keeping churches than me.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 2 things I got from that. 1, it's true, but 2, it shouldn't be true. we should aim higher, but he was right. And I'll admit it, there's better people, but it shouldn't be true.
I'll probably get in trouble. I have an uncle. Now he was a much older man, passed away many years ago. He was in this Jehovah's Witnesses, but I think that's Uncle Jim, like my grandfather. They're very much similar. He was a very good family man, very strong. You would like him. And maybe even having a church, no matter what, was good for him. Now, I hear the Seventh-day Adventists have become more cultish in the last 40 years. And he wasn't probably into too much of that because he was in there before all that stuff started. I presume. Also, I've heard the Eastern Orthodox Church is a little more biblically sound than the Roman Catholic Church. Have anybody else heard that?
I haven't heard it, but I believe it.
I feel like they've been more strict on values and things like that, and like holding the line, if you will, socially, morally, and all that. That it's been more consistent. But it's still it's another outgrowth of Rome. It's not. We treat it as something different, but Constantine moved the whole capital, and that's where that's been coming from the entire time. Is the Pope that got left behind in Rome, which is an interesting wrinkle.
You have the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire, Yeah, you're right. It's still the Eastern Roman Empire. Forget about that. Yeah, you're right. Let's read Second Thessalonians 2, please, Ken.
Not to soon be shaken or in mind or troubled, either by spirit or by word or by letter, as if from us, as though the day of Christ had come. Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, and with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth, that they might be saved.
My thought is, don't you think the world is becoming less objective? People don't care about the truth anymore.
And if you apply that to them also getting more religious at the same time, then you see that we have a rather dangerous, situation brewing where you could be easily, led into some extreme stuff.
Yeah.
That is so true. That really is so true. And it just makes you worry about everything. Are they going to follow the truth completely or not? You all could hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to be sure I'm coming in loud and clear. But I think that there's an attitude of, we want to hear what we want to hear. We don't care what the truth is. Don't you think demons like that attitude?
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
We can see that in our political system today. We're going to see it tomorrow, although I don't think it'll be as extreme as some people do. But yeah, we're going to see that very same scenario played out in cities across the country tomorrow.
Yeah.
And by the way, you would think they're going to have a patriotic parade on the birthday of the U.S. Army, which I guess started in 1775, actually before the Declaration of Independence, but anyway. And this is the day, which also happens by coincidence to be Donald Trump's birthday. But regardless of that, wouldn't you think that celebrating our military be a day for flag raising and patriotism?
You would think,
Sure.
but most of these people hate our country, so to them it's the other way around.
In a different sense, it will be. It'll just be, the Mexican flag or the Palestinian flag. It'll be some other flag.
Yeah, exactly.
It'll be very patriotic, but in different ways in different places.
We got to learn to love is it the PLO flag or Hamas flag, as well as the Mexican flag we keep seeing everywhere?
Oh,
Is it the PLO flag that they're flying, or
Mexican
There
flag,
have
we're
been-
seeing a lot of that.
Of the Mexican flag, yeah.
yeah?
There's
I just
been a
think that's
movement. There's been a movement for decades that people don't know about. It's called the Reconquista movement. Mexicans are trying to get back the Southwest. They claim we stole it, even though we bought it or ran them out because they, for whatever reason, but we bought most of it. And they want to try and take it back. And that's what a lot is behind a lot of this at its core. They're not saying it out loud, but that's what's behind this at its core.
Yeah. I heard a commenter saying that in California, particularly, California was settled by Spaniards, not by Mexicans. So there ought to be Spanish flags there, not Mexican flags.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you're
Why
gonna
do they
go
all
back-
speak? Well, I don't know.
And why not go
We're gonna-
back
We're gonna get
100
off
years
track
or two
here.
Yeah,
before we
yeah,
go.
I'm done.
Yeah.
before that? And what about the Indian tribes? And I don't know if it's the Aztec, but the others. I can't remember which one. They're in the area before the Spanish got there. How come it doesn't go back to them? You see, you get carried away and all the history gets erased. But America paid millions of dollars for the Southwest. By the way, the United States didn't even have to pay for it. A lot of countries would have just taken it. You study the history of a lot of, when we got Florida, we paid Spain for Florida. But after Andrew Jackson, whatever he did militarily, they pretty much controlled. They could have just said, okay, we're taking it over. That's how you took it. We're taking it. That's how the world was done. Conquest. And then another 100 years later, another group would conquer that. We were nice. When I say we, the government, to pay them for it.
Yeah, I don't see
Millions of
anybody
dollars.
asking France to give their country back to the Visigoths. Every country on the planet's been conquered by another people at some one point in time somewhere.
Yeah. If you just go back far enough, and a lot of times you don't have to go back too many centuries. It's unpatriotic. The iconic picture I think of LA, a guy's on top of and they're burning cars and he's waving a giant Mexican flag. And that's got I heard this on Fox, but I believe it. They said this is politically not helping our movement, and they passed out American flags. Well, guess what many of them did with the American flags?
Burn them.
Burn
Did you see the irony of that?
Yeah.
They burned the American flag.
Yeah, they know that's not that it's not helpful. It's not about peace though. It's either about, me getting what I want, or it's about me being
Yeah.
right, or it's about, it's somehow it's not about, settling it and living in peace and harmony, or making things right and legal, I don't know.
Plus, they settled it, 200 years ago, almost. We're going to unearth everything that's been done 150, 200 years ago. And then
Only
if
when
you
it's
make a settlement
convenient.
now, they undermine that one 50 years in the future, right?
Well,
It's just-
these are
They
all
just wanted-
these are
So
all
they just wanted
communist
to-
tactics that they use to divide the
Yeah.
people, which is what we were talking about earlier. They divide the people, try to cut enough people out and get enough angry. It usually works in countries because they have class systems. We don't have a class system in the United States. Anybody in this country can be born and make themselves quite successful and rich, or whatever you want to say, which doesn't happen in countries like India and in the past England and things like that. But they got nothing else to go on, so they use race and they use financial things, and that's how communists are trying to separate us and take over.
When we're talking about spiritual wolves, it's like political wolves. But there's
Same
a parallel,
difference,
like you
same
said.
spirit.
And that
Yeah.
spirit of truth is irrelevant. It's my truth. And that's what we want to warn people about. I think that's what the devil and his minions will use. The people don't love the truth. And
Yeah,
they
you
make
can
up
see how
whatever
well
truth
You can see how well it's worked on the political front. Why shouldn't it work just as well on the religious front? It is the same kind of thing. It is not a love of the truth or of justice or whatever. It's self-serving.
Okay, precept 3, the spiritually mature must remain gracious and humble. Ken, would you read Galatians 6:1, please?
Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself lest you also be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone thinks himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. And once they've gone that far, they can't see that.
It makes me think of the parable when Christ said, you leave the 99 in the wilderness and you go after the one. That it all matters. That's the goal. And what he said about his own disciples, that he had not lost any except the son of perdition, that in the way that was necessary for what was prophesied to be fulfilled, for him to be betrayed. And that's it's a humbling thing, because especially in the history of the Church of God has a lot of bad chapters and bad blood and rancorous things and people falling out with each other, or excommunicating one another. I mean, it's been on both sides of my family. I know it's part of a lot of people's lives. It's been a part of a lot of people's religious experience, if you will, be it the Church of God or be it some other church where they begin falling out over something, and It hurts. It hurts because it's close to home and it's over the very most important things in life, And
I think about the fact, God called these people. And if you do things that interfere with that, then you've got to answer for that.
And if someone needs forgiveness because they've screwed up, be Christ-like.
Yes.
Yeah, what was the
We-
one, if you're bringing your gift to the temple and you've got something with your brother that's not resolved, God needs to do that. You do that first. This is your list of priorities. You're comparing your responsibility to your brother to your responsibility to God, and God says, what are you doing with me if you can't even handle, what's going on around you?
Yeah, good point.
Ken, could you read 2 Corinthians 2:5, please?
Not to be too severe, this punishment which is inflicted by the majority is sufficient for such a man, so that on the contrary, you ought rather to forgive and comfort him, lest perhaps such a one be swallowed up with too much sorrow. Now, whom you forgive anything, I also forgive, lest Satan should take advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices.
One thing occurs to me, we might actually, since they heard Paul preach and his disciples preach for months, they knew more about Satan's devices than we do. But surely, from the context, one of his devices is an unforgiving, hard-hearted, in some ways, I'm dancing on your grave and I love it, spirit.
Yep. Yeah.
Mhm.
And we've seen that occasionally. We've gone through it in our group.
It's like, well, I always knew that you weren't that good. Now that you have problems, everybody knows it. I'm happy that it wasn't me, it's you, or some such attitude like that. You know that you got to know that's wrong, right?
Right.
Well, there's that scripture where it says, the day will come when those that kill you think that they do God a service, if you will. And then, of course, you've got the world celebrating over the death of the two witnesses there at the very end. A spiritual aspect of that, often when people completely break with others, it is a type of judgment. It's a type of condemnation. Like that person is toast, forever. You pretty much, close the book on them, if you will, and as if that's the end. It's murdering them spiritually. It's you that's getting a wound for carrying that attitude around or not leaving it open, or whatever it may be. But it's similar.
Yep, it is similar. Okay, precept number 4. Work to strengthen the only offensive weapon, which is the Word of God, the only offensive weapon, helping people get a high Bible IQ. Kim, would you read Ephesians 6:11, please?
Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. Above all, taking the shield of faith, with which you will be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked one, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God.
And my thought is, you can slice and dice or dissect bad doctrine if you know the Bible. Like if somebody says, well, grace trumps the law. All we need is grace. And in effect, they're saying grace is a license to sin. And by the way, some Protestants, if you really boil down the essence of what they're saying, they do use grace that way. They just don't openly admit it. Well, if you know the Bible well, you can say, wait a minute, what about Romans 3:31, Romans 6:1, and Romans 7:15? I can rattle off some other, where Paul actually poses the question, because he's talking about grace a lot. He said, now, does that mean that grace and faith do away with God's law? And of course, his answer is, God forbid. Are you kidding me? No way. And he says it 3 or 4 times in the letter. And it's so clear that you can't dance around it. Well, if a person knows those scriptures and someone comes with that, well, grace is all you need. And they can even quote a great teacher like Martin Luther. You see what I mean? You can handle it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah, you're well grounded. You can handle it. It's not going to hurt you. It's gonna bounce off. You get your sword up, your shield up, your sword's ready. Like what? It's not going to hurt you, and that's a comforting thing, but it's also a responsibility, I guess, to stay in it. It's a responsibility of an individual who doesn't feel like they know much about the Bible to know we're so blessed to be able to read for ourselves and to talk about it and to understand and consult endless commentaries and get advice from people with experience, and man, it's a tremendous blessing.
We listen to this radio show sometimes called Voice of the Martyr. We get their magazine. There are places in the world where it's hard to get a Bible and few have commentaries. And we take all this stuff for granted, but there are places in the world where it's hard to get. And the government doesn't want you to have it, and there are other bad people around who don't want you to have it.
Yeah, I'm amazed sometimes how much resources we have. I've got a software program. It's got about 20 or some odd translations on it and 50 commentaries. And I think about what in the early days of church, the worldwide church, what all they had to go through to get all these things. They had to go find the documents, had to find the books, had to find the translations, had to read them, had to look at the commentaries, and we just flip a button and see all this stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a software
Incredible.
out there that you can download for $5, gives you anything and everything you could possibly want just about the study.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're blessed. Sometimes when you're blessed, it's so easy that you don't appreciate it.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
But there are places in the world where there are people actively trying to keep them from having it. Ken, could you read Ephesians 4:14, please?
That we should no longer be children, tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the trickery of men, in the cunning craftiness of deceitful plotting, but speaking the truth in love may grow up in all things into him who is the head, Christ.
I think of the wolf example. If you're wolves and you're, say, tracking a pack of elk.
Pack of elves. They travel in packs now.
Yeah.
It's a herd animal. It's a herd animal, Ken. Come on. Yes.
If they're all strong and fast, you'd probably give that up and say, that's a waste of our energy. Let's go look for some other more easy victims, right?
You've ruined my visual now. Such a little elves running around.
They'll leave you alone because they soon realize this is a waste of time. These people know how to use their Bibles and their Bible knowledge too effectively. They cannot be easily led astray.
Sure. I think that's valid. I mean, that's how crooks work too. They prey on the weak. Yeah.
That's one thing that bothers me about now that I'm an older person. But I hear about this in not just where I am, but it's happening in a part of town, well, near an old person's retirement home, where a lot of these criminals, it's like a couple blocks walk from the store, because a lot of them don't have cars anymore, and to the retirement home. And these young men hang around, and in some cases, all they have to do is just say, "Can you give me $5?" And then kind of move at them aggressively, and they get the money, or they grab their purses. And if you're young and healthy and you're roughing up the elderly, well, that's an easy victim.
Mm-hmm.
Little old lady is scared spitless. If I were prosecutor, I'd give them a long jail sentence if I caught them. In a lot of cases, they don't even have to say, "I'm robbing you." They just act in an intimidating way, and they get what they want. Well, isn't that almost the same thing?
Sure.
And I could tell you some other stories. They even tell them, don't hold on to your purse because you could get seriously injured.
Man.
Yeah. And we read about people getting drugged down the street, hanging onto their cars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seriously hurt.
Yeah, run
And,
over, all kinds of stuff.
So,
Great
any
world.
rate,
Great world we live in.
yeah. I was driving by a place near the inner part of town, and a dangerous looking guy was there, and I thought, I just rolled up my car window so he wouldn't be too close to me. I just didn't want to take any chances of something going wrong. You're saying, you're too suspicious, right? I should probably not be so suspicious. But some people just look crazy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Maybe they are.
And you look and say, I want to keep as much separation between him and me as I possibly can. Like a wolf is looking for elderly people to prey on, or they're looking for the spiritually weak to prey upon.
Isolated. We used to have some people come into the church, very knowledgeable, been around a long time, and they lived in a town about 75 or 80 miles away from us. And they got to reading the Bible, just the two of them isolated, and they decided and figured out that Paul said you don't have to keep the holy days anymore.
Really?
And wrote a big letter to prove that to us. And I was kind of stunned because I thought they were fairly solid people. But that's kind of what happens when you get isolated. You know, if you don't go to church on the Sabbath, if you don't do the Bible studies, if you don't stay with the people, like-minded people, that can happen to you. You're out there alone without support. You can get off track and not know it. Yeah. Can't happen to me. Yeah, well, better be careful with that attitude.
That's why if you are isolated, try to get material from the headquarters office in Tyler. If you can, watch the Wi-Fi CGI channel. Any thoughts, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, any way that you can stay connected, and also, you know, maybe even if you're not close, you know, there's somebody somewhere that's willing to have contact and to discuss things, and you know, you can read and you can study, but it always helps to have a frame of reference, because sometimes, you know, you read, right. I'm sure we've all had the experience where you've been reading over something, and then eventually something new will pop out at you, or something will click. Someone else will have some insight. Then often on this show, you know, something will come out of the conversation. It's like, well, you know, I've never really considered it like that before. That's new and insightful. That's a deeper understanding for me personally on whatever topic it may be. In these notes, you know, you mentioned the correspondence courses that we've been publishing, like in a serial fashion in the magazines. You know, as we've done that, I've read them and stuff in advance, and we often have to like make them fit in the pages that are there and all that stuff. And you know, or like the one on the Sabbath, which is incredibly long. You know, the one on the Sabbath was like 20 pages or something. We couldn't put it all in there. We just encourage people to, you know, you want to read the whole thing, call, and we'll gladly send you a copy. But you know, that kind of stuff that has been looked over and has been studied. It's of great value. But also personal contact, because sometimes if you're hung up, you know, somebody else will be able to answer it in a way that makes it clear for you when you're just stuck. You can't see your way around whatever you have in your head. Something means it'll throw you, and you know, it's real. That's real. I feel like we've probably all been through that kind of thing.
I just hang around you guys. I figured you'll slap me upside the head if I get out of hand. So I'd be disappointed if you didn't. So
I got people in my congregation that'll do that in a heartbeat.
Oh yeah, even if you don't get out of hand, right?
That's right.
Yeah, one thing that we might advise, people might come to the feast this year and other holy days, meet some of the elders, deacons, deaconesses, what I call people you consider good, strong church members, exchange phone numbers and emails, and you can call them every so often just to chat. And then if you have some issues, they might be able to help you. And of course, you can call the people in our home office, right, Michael?
Absolutely. I've spent a lot of time recently on the phone and answering emails and things like that. You know, people, there's a thirst for knowledge, and you think with all these resources, you know, the answers are out there, but sometimes it's hard to get started. You know, it can be overwhelming. You don't know where exactly to look, or you read all this contradictory information, and it's hard to make heads or tails of it. And there's no shame in that.
You know, we don't have an ICG AI.
No, no. Sometimes I feel like people are afraid to bring up something that they're not sure about because they think, oh, well, like I'm taking issue with, with doctrine or whatever it may be. And we can always talk. People, if you'll find in the church, I think, if you overcome that, and it hasn't always been that way, and it isn't that way in every place, but to be able to you don't have to approach things from a combative perspective. You just say, well, what about this? Or, this seems to say this. What do you think? Get some insight on it. Maybe they'll have a resource for you to turn to. You can learn more, whatever the topic may be. I often end up referring to a book or a sermon or something like, well, you might like this. This might be helpful,
Yeah.
Yep.
Got them where they can get more detail. Yeah.
Let's go to precept number 5. Reject those who do not wish to cooperate with other leaders. And I want to just say that, we all know the Apostle Paul was chosen specifically to be the apostle to the Gentiles. Considering how special Paul was, and no one today can say they have the same special position Paul had. In spite of that, you see Paul cooperating with the other apostles who were there before him. Could you read Galatians 2:2, please, Ken?
And I went up by revelation and communicated to them that gospel which I preach among the Gentiles, but privately to those who were of reputation, lest by any means I might run or had run in vain. But on the contrary, when they saw that the gospel for the uncircumcised had been committed to me, as the gospel for the circumcised was to Peter, and when James, Cephas, and John, who seemed to be pillars, perceived the grace that had been given to me, they gave me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship.
And so the point I want to make is, he said, lest by any means I might run and had run in vain. He went up privately. Here's one way you might look at it. Paul could have gone to Jerusalem and said, hey, Christ has chosen me, and, give the details. I'm special. And if these guys who think they're big shots in the church down here don't agree with me, they got a problem. And said that publicly. And something went wrong, and it could have caused trouble. Paul is saying he didn't want that kind of problem, run in vain. He's admitting he's cooperating for the sake of church unity. And considering who Paul was. So if some guy now comes along and says, well, I know I'm right, and I'm totally right, and I don't have to check with anybody else, come follow me. Can you see he's not in the attitude that Paul was in?
Yeah, it's very tactful of Paul to handle it in that way, because as you said, he was somebody special. He did have a special commission, but you know what? It's like he didn't need to. He knew that. It's not like he needed to vaunt himself or to prove it to anybody else. It was true. He was doing a very special, unique work, if you will, and had a special commission. Like what more do you need than that? And you can see the way that in the way that he's accepted the right hand of fellowship and all that. They're like, yeah, you're right on. Great job. Glad, it's good.
His ego didn't get in the way. And we've seen that happen. I have in the church, ego seems to be a big problem. And here Paul clearly has this under control, and he approached it in a manner of fellowship, and association.
The truth is, ego is a problem for human nature. We just don't want to admit it to ourselves, but it's a problem.
Sure.
And you can have confidence and be strong without being egotistical, but it's not necessarily natural or easy.
No. Now you got to remember that we were called. He can call anybody he wants. He can get someone else. He can replace us. It's not about you. You know what I mean? It's not about us. It's about what God wants his people to do.
Yeah, what Christ said, God could raise up, children, you're the children of Abraham. He said God could raise up children to Abraham, like out of these very stones. Like, what are you,
Yeah.
it's not, never mind, your credentials or whatever you think. It's very strong about being high-minded or, who you are or what you are or whatever it may be.
Yeah. It says, don't think too much of yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah. You all follow me because I'm the only one that knows this new truth. And those guys and Tyler and whoever else you want to say, those guys from the feast, what do they know? I mean, I've actually heard these exact words or words similar to that. And off they go. And I'm almost saying with rare exception, and I really mean that, splinter groups in the long run, they're doing the will of Satan, which is to take people out of the church, but they don't build anything that lasts or that's substantial or that's good for people. They just splinter people off.
Kind of fade away.
Kelly was telling me for the feast, they have like all the, I don't want to upset anybody, but they have a feast for all the like independent groups. And one of them is near Panama City Beach. They have a feast down there somewhere. I don't know. It might be an hour away, 2 hours away, but they have a feast for all the independent groups. But Kelly was telling me he's going through some of their pamphlets because they all have their literature there. And some of them have gone kind of off the reservation, so to speak, talking about circle chanting and all kinds of. So when you get out on these islands, you kind of lose contact with grounded, a grounded base, grounded base, and you can kind of go your own way, and you don't know where you're going to end up. We were going to up in Michigan. Gary had us going to with another group once in a while, just kind of a good fellowship thing or whatever, but they got into some weird stuff. I went a couple of times and that was the end of that. But I just think there's got to be grounded somewhere to tell you, wait, this is where we're at, unless you can prove otherwise to everybody's satisfaction. We're not going that way.
Well said.
And pretty much everything's already been proven for years.
Yeah, I mean, people before me, for 100 years before me, have been working on this. And I mean, as just from the United ICG or whatever down that lineage, I got nothing.
By the way, just to give another opinion, that might be worth. Even when Herbert Armstrong came along, I think he got ordained in 1927. But much of the stuff he got from I hope I say this accurately, Church of God, Seventh-day Missouri Synod. And they had an Oregon branch. But much of the stuff he got, the Church of God had, and probably for a century or two before that, from other men who probably got it from other men and got it from Europe. And I'm not saying he didn't do a good job of organizing it and promoting it on the radio. But my point is, a lot of this stuff has been inherited for centuries. We don't need to try to invent the wheel. And when some guy comes up with a new invention, you should be suspicious.
Since Christ started the church.
Yeah.
It dates back that long.
Yeah. If you want to take it clear back to there, I got nothing. I mean,
this is what Christ said. This is what you do.
And I suppose I should give Herbert Armstrong this credit too. There were people in the synagogue who believed in keeping the holy days and some that didn't. And he eventually believed the ones who believed it were the best and the strongest, and he did a good job of developing and promoting it. But he didn't invent the idea out of sheer air. That's what I'm trying to say. Does that make sense?
They had a very interesting approach in allowing, I guess, even like contradictory and rival articles and stuff to be published in their publications and all that. And the truths that he latched onto and then preached. Everybody has to. there's nothing new except for new people that have to come along and have to learn all these things and have to go through this process over and over again. And so we're in this, you're in this endless repetition where you have to keep proving it. You need to keep proving it to yourself. You need to be well up on it so that you can help others along the way. And sometimes there are going to be differences, and some of them are going to be so big you think, well, that's a hindrance to us like meeting together all the time. And you know what? We're each responsible to God directly, but you got to do a real good job of doing your homework. If it's going to be about falling out over doctrine or something like that, I mean, you can't just go willy-nilly, and you got to know what you're talking about.
And we've had people go. We've had people for a while go. They go to 2 services on the Sabbath, maybe another group, and then they'd come to our group, and I went with them. I didn't have no problem with what they were saying or anything. Sometimes the differences between some groups is so small that but it's the ones which what we're talking about tonight that try to change doctrinal things that kind of fit across all the Church of God groups, us and many others that are organized. And if long as it's meeting those criteria, fine. But when you start talking about circle chants, and, I don't know, there's been a few other strange ones, but yeah, then you got to be careful.
About a magic stone, but I got to get more information on it. I'll try to get more legend. Apparently one of the groups has gone into magic stones, but the guy told me about it, and I didn't. We talked about other stuff.
Was there a sword sticking in it? Was there a sword sticking? Maybe he's reading the wrong book.
By the way, just speaking of church history, I once had the book from A. Allen written in 1902 about British Israelism. That doctrine existed then. He got it from some people before him. In other words, things that you think are new are not as new as you think they are, whatever it's worth. And by the way, the British throne may be changing. Charles may give the throne over to his son, William. But anyway, that's another story. Okay, precept number 6. Use and respect the vast amounts of past sound doctrine, like we were saying. Would you want to talk more about the correspondence course, Michael?
Oh, I guess I mentioned it early. I mean, I've just felt like it's a very good and thorough resource. Very, very much so. And if you've not read through those before, it's heavy stuff. And that was a group effort over a very long period of time, and it's really solid.
I might just want to show this to you, not that it's a big deal, but I still want to show. Sometimes people are visual learners. Here's one of the recent church magazines. Some of you will remember this headline. And if you go to the back of it, there's a correspondence course. Hope I'm too quickly. And it's all about the covenants. And you can do that. I just think it's a good way to have people read those when the magazine comes in.
Keep you going. And we're gonna get to the end of it at some point, and we've wondered what we're gonna do next. Well, maybe we're just gonna start over, and start republishing them. So many years will have gone by, when you're talking about one lesson per quarter, or even sometimes part of a lesson. There's some that we've had to break into 2 or 3. It's good. It's good to go back over. It's good to go back over your stuff.
Yeah, just another thing also, while we're taking a short break, to remind people that we do have audio versions. Usually on Monday we get them updated. So when you have this program on Monday, I'll publish the audio version to your podcast app. Just search for Line Upon Line, look for our logo, and you can download any of them. And also the ICG, Intercontinental Church of God, all the sermons have a audio version as well. You can download it right to your phone. You don't have to see our smiling faces. You can just listen while you're mowing the grass or jogging, if you so choose to do such a thing.
or driving your car if it won't upset you too much,
or
right?
driving your car,
and my
if you got a
joke
long
won't
ride
shock you into steering into a stop sign.
You want to hear a few sermons, you can do that all on audio only.
Yeah.
I like audio. You can listen to it when you're relaxing, right? Put you to sleep.
Put you right to sleep. I'm sure many people have dozed off since they started watching this at 9 o'clock. Wake up. Also, I just want to
Okay, I know
interject,
we're-
you know, for the purpose of the program, we mentioned some of these other offshoots that can get into the woods, but I don't want anybody to think that we're attacking any groups or people or anything like that, because that's not the case. I've met some beautiful people across the board, and we all know that it's just sometimes if you're not careful, you can get led astray by the wrong people.
Okay, I'm going to skip 2 Timothy 2:14. It says, study to show yourself approved. But read that scripture at home, and you'll see it fits what we're saying, that we want our people to be well up on their Bibles. I want to go to precept 7, since I know time is flying. Precept 7, always encourage a spirit of learning and seeking deeper meaning. And I think it's like an onion. Every year when you go into the holy days, you can see it more deeply, more purely. So we're not being stagnant. We want to learn more and more, but fit it on to the proper foundation.
Did I miss something?
No.
No.
I mean, I didn't know what to add. It's good, and you know, we all have more stuff to learn. There's more stuff to learn out there than you know. You got time in life to absorb it all, or the ability to retain it all. You know, so.
And I think you grow old, stodgy, and you start to die when you stop trying to learn.
That's why you're so vigorous and youthful, Dr. Ricks. It's all the books back there.
Yeah, well, I really should do more reading. I'm going to admit that, because God knows the truth. But Ken, would you read 2 Timothy 4:2, please?
You mean 2:14?
I mean, 2 Timothy 4:2. We're going to pass up 2:14.
Okay. All right. Oop, I had it there. All right. Preach the word, be instant in season and out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and doctrine. For the time will come when they do not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust shall they heap to themselves teachers having itchy ears.
And I think every holy day season, like Passover season, Pentecost season, trumpet season, or, you know, last great day season, we should preach those issues and try to help our people learn them better and deeper and better, and never stop learning, maybe more background on what God meant by it. We can skip the last scripture, 2 Timothy 4:4, where he just says, people will turn away from the truth. But we know that's coming, and already is coming. I'd almost argue that the biggest churches have the least amount of Bible study. I've seen that, the big mega church, I won't mention any names, but you check them. The big mega churches, they may have great music and beautiful buildings, but they do very little Bible.
Yeah.
People don't want it, right?
I mean, I was
guess
at
so, you know.
I was at a church. I think it might have been a Catholic church, for somebody wanted me to go for something years ago. I don't know. They might have read 4 or 5 scriptures, maybe. That was their whole thing. I'm like, when's church start? Oh, it's over. Seriously? I'd never been. I didn't know.
Yeah. Well, people don't want to put out the effort to have to do anything. They just want to be able to do what they want without consequences, you know, or responsibility.
So, and we have to try to, as leaders within the church and those that have offices, to try to strengthen everybody so we can go through whatever deception is coming our way and come out the other end strong. And I was thinking about, you might look at Matthew 24:24, that great deception is coming, and it's Matthew 24:24. But I was thinking about, as far as Bible prophecy, a lot's going on in the world right now.
Oh, big
Yes,
time.
it is. Yes, it is.
Yeah. Seems like things are getting set up to even have more happen.
Yeah, to me, it's
and
the
it could happen quickly.
oh, it can. To me, it's this like the Marxists are in there, got their backs up against the wall, and they're doing one final push to try and take power back. And I don't know if they're going to pull it off or not, but it don't look good for them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a lot of even whole regimes and stuff in the world. If you think Iran, you think they're going to go down without a fight necessarily. Are they they're gonna let go of their power completely, because they're way on the back foot after with their allies in Hamas and with Hezbollah getting wiped out, and even the Houthis have been set back quite a bit here recently. Are they gonna go away quietly? Do they have the power to bring it all down around them? There is that attitude that I'd rather ruin everything than give up what I have. You worry about countries like North Korea, who are openly nuclear armed. Like, are they ever going to go anywhere without blowing the whole thing up? It only takes a couple people that are really wacko to maybe pray for them. It doesn't hurt.
By the way, you might know, we mentioned that Xi Jinping is fighting for his life. They claim this fall they're going to retire him, but they haven't decided on his replacement. And maybe they're going to give, well, this is what this one expert claims. They may give the Chinese people the impression they're going to make reforms, because a lot of Chinese people deep down really hate Xi Jinping and the Communist Party. They can't say it openly because it's a brutal police state. The question is, like you're saying, can the communists hold out in China? Can the radical people hold out in Iran? And maybe in a few other places. Even in Europe, I think the establishment quasi-socialists are being challenged by the conservative parties. So far, they've been able to box them out, maneuver them out, or get judges to claim that those parties are illegal. But you get the feeling that the world is on the verge, maybe of change. Like you say, the ones being pushed out might have a great backlash. It could be very dangerous.
Yeah, they're not taking the counter revolution very well, because we have been undergoing a kind of a global revolution pushing us to the left, and some countries and some regions are experiencing counter revolutions where people just are sick of it, they don't want it, and they're pushing back. But they're not taking it well, and they're like a 3-year-old, they're on the floor screaming and yelling and crying and carrying on and acting like they're it's the end of the world, and they're they don't get the the toy car they want, and they're screaming and hollering and carrying on like an infant. So that's what we're dealing with these people. You notice, you notice right now, all the groups they're kind of, you go to, you see these protests nowadays. You're going to see the Mexican, the illegals protesting. You're going to see pro-Palestinian protesters. You're going to see pro-communist protesters, BLM, Antifa. They're all together in cahoots with this mess. They're all working together. They're the same side, the different sides of the same coin. And they're all teamed up now in this effort to try and stop us or the people of this country from saying, nah, we're sick of this. LGBTQ, they're all on the same side. And you notice this year it's not Pride Month necessarily. Now it's Global Pride Month. I heard that the other day. It's a worldwide Pride Month. Seriously?
Makes you think Satan may be behind it, doesn't it?
Oh, big time.
What's falling so flat in Europe and places particularly is that the underlying problems in these nations are not being solved. And as you say, like, this has been the status quo for a very long time. They desperately need to change the subject onto some kind of social issue or some kind of emotional thing, because that's the only place where they can keep their constituency fired up. They have failed utterly at addressing like the underlying economic problems and the problems of immigration and social integration and all these other things that they're like, everything's going to be fine, and it's not fine. And you can only kick the can down the road for so long. So whatever they want to do to distract and make it about something else, it's falling flat with people because there are not any real solutions. And when people do try to push real solutions, like we do in this country, here comes the river of tears and here comes violence in the streets. And, they want it to get whipped up into an us and them thing so they can talk about something other than the root causes of prosperity and stability in society. And, that comes again with being well grounded and being personally moral and not compromising and not getting pushed around with all the nonsense that's out there.
Yeah.
Things that I'm going to pray for. I'm going to pray that the Iranian people can be freed from the rule of the mullahs. This might be big, that the Chinese people can get freed from the Communist Party. I know they'll never have a perfect Jeffersonian type democracy, republic government, but something better than they've got now. And also, maybe America can get back to traditional values carrying the day and not let the media and the radicals, undermine everything. And the media definitely cannot be trusted. That includes ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and CSN, whatever, NBC. So you'll know for sure who I'm referring to.
You want a leopard to change its spots?
Well, at any rate, I want to thank all of you for your wonderful contributions and for all those who listen to the bitter end. Sometimes our best stuff is on the end, don't you think, Ken?
Sometimes. And we appreciate everybody who tunes in, and we thank you for being with us tonight, and hope the rest of your Sabbath goes well. I think it's supposed to rain here tomorrow, but that's fine. We haven't had a ton of rain lately. So good night, everyone. We'll see you back here again next week.
Good night.
Good night.
We're happy you could make it, and so glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.